Welcome to episode 126 of the Women of the Military podcast. This week my guest is Dr. Ann James. She joined the Air Force after leaving high school and needed a way to pay for college. Her older brother was in the Air Force, so she decided to follow in his footsteps. She first went to North Dakota and next was transferred to Italy. She got married and had her daughter and was divorced while in Italy. As a single mom, she knew that her daughter was depending on her, so she planned to stay in the military until retirement. At 2, her daughter was diagnosed as a delayed development, and this forced Anne to make sure they were financially stable and make the right choices to take care of her. I really enjoyed hearing her story of serving in the military and the challenges she faced as a mom with a daughter who had special needs, and how she was able to continue to get her degree and become a doctor. And I also want to mention that she recently started her own podcast, which I'll link to in the show notes, and it is called Battle Buddies of Color. So now that we got that out of the way, let's get started. You're listening to Season 3 of the Women of the Military podcast. Here you will find the real stories of female service members. I'm Amanda Huffman. I am an Air Force veteran, military spouse, and mom. I created Women of the Military podcast in 2019 as a place to share the stories of female service members past and present, with the goal of finding the heart of the story while uncovering the triumphs and challenges women face while serving in the military. If you want to be encouraged by the stories of military women and be inspired to change the world, keep tuned for this latest episode of Women of the Military. It's another week in March, so let's highlight another woman-run podcast. This week I am highlighting The Truths We Hide with Annette Wittenberger. Annette and I met a long time ago, and I'm not even sure how we got connected, but she was one of the first people on my podcast. She was in episode 11, and funny enough, I was on her podcast, and I was also episode 11, and so it's kind of funny that happened, because that totally wasn't planned. But on Annette's podcast, The Truths We Hide, she talks about the raw moments of military life or life in general. I think it's really cool that she talks not only to military members, but also civilians. And recently, she had the opportunity to interview Rachel Hollis, which is pretty cool, and I'm just so proud of her for being able to highlight the stories and the truths of what happens behind the scenes. Annette is so brave in sharing her story, and it allows people to open up and share their story, and I'm just so thankful for the work that she's doing and all the accomplishments that she's had. So if you want to hear a podcast and hear about the truths behind what people are saying, go check out her podcast. And with that, let's get started with this week's episode featuring Dr. Ann James. Welcome to the show, Ann. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate it. I'm so excited to be here. I've been waiting.
Been a while.
It has been a while.
So let's start with, why did you decide to join the military?
Yeah, wow. The reason why I decided to join the military, Amanda, is that, I'm the youngest of a single mother, and I wanted money for college and to travel. So my oldest brother, he was in the Air Force. So one summer I went to visit him at his base. I think he was stationed in Arkansas. So I went to visit one summer, and I liked what I saw, and that's where it took off from there. So really to follow in the footsteps of my big brother, and also, like I said, to just get money for school and also to travel.
So you decided to join the Air Force like your older brother?
Yes, exactly. And I almost forgot too, right? My stepfather, he was Army. Right. So I knew that I wasn't going to do Army, because I saw how he got up early in the morning and did PT, and they spent weeks out in the woods. So I didn't want no part of that. So, and I know I look better in blue. So that's why I ended up joining the Air Force.
So you were a military brat for part of your lifetime.
Yeah, I was.
So you were like, nope, no Army.
No Army. I didn't want to do PT. That was my mind at the time, because when I went in, Amanda, I was 18. So, straight out of high school, the only job I had before that is working at McDonald's. So, I really didn't know any better, but I knew what I didn't want. And so that Air Force was the way to go for me. No back, no shame to nobody else.
Yeah. So did you decide when you were still a senior in high school that you wanted to enlist into the Air Force?
No, you know what? Actually, it was after. When I was in school, I knew I wanted to go to college, but like I said, at the time, my mom was single. So I was like, I didn't want to put that burden on her. You know what I'm saying? So I really kind of didn't give it any thought until after I graduated, right? So once I graduated, it's like, okay, now what? That type stuff. And it was that summer, like I said, is when I visited my brother, and the decision was made after the fact.
And so how long was it between when you went to the recruiter and then you headed off to boot camp?
If I recall correctly, I want to say I went to the recruiter maybe in August or September. So it had to be in the fall. And then March is when I left California at the time and got on the bus and headed to the MEPS and stuff like that.
So what was your job when you were in the Air Force?
Well, my first job, Amanda, was I went in as a personnel technician, or what some people refer as human resources. I went in enlisted, E1, straight out the bat. I did personnel, and that's, helping people with their records, stuff like that. Computer systems. I did a lot of computer stuff on the personnel side of the house, but it was personnel.
And you said that you started as enlisted, and I know there's more to the story. Did you use tuition assistance to get your degree, or how did you get your degree and then make the switch to being an officer?
Yeah, great point. I did, while I was enlisted, I was very fortunate. My first duty station was South Dakota. So I wanted the heck out of there. Going from California to South Dakota, I was like, oh, heck no. So then I volunteered to go worldwide, and I ended up in Italy. So, I had some great supervisors that allowed me to, actually take courses during my lunch hour at the education center. Back on the day, we actually had ed centers where we can actually go and take courses. And then at the time as well, online was just starting to, come fashionable. So I went online using tuition assistance because I ended up being a single parent when I was at Italy. I got married, had a baby, eventually ended up getting divorced. So I was a single parent. So the online realm really worked for me. But yes, I used my tuition assistance to get my bachelor's. But at the time, they came out with this special program where if you had your bachelor's already, it was via ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. So what I ended up doing was I got out for a year and actually worked on my master's. I was able to get my master's, and then I came back in as an officer. So I took advantage of that, special thing with ROTC because they was looking for more officers at the time. And I was actually fortunate enough to be able to, financially separate for a year. Who does that and then come back in, right? So that's how I ended up making the switch or crossing over to the dark side, as some people like to say, and becoming a finance officer.
Yeah, and let's go back a little bit and talk about being a single mom and the challenges that you had. I mean, I'm sure it was challenging being married and having a kid and then getting divorced. Like, that sounds like a lot of stories. So can you talk about, and how old were you? Like 21?
Oh, girl, you're going to put me on blast, ask me my age? No. Yeah, no, you hit it right on the head. When I got married, I was 20. I had my daughter when I had turned 22. And we divorced shortly after that. Overseas, first time away from home. Young, stupid love, military life, that type stuff. So I ended up, like I said, unexpectedly becoming a single mother. That was definitely challenging because, as you know, the military, they expect you to be somewhere. They don't want to hear you, camp out in daycare, or you get recalled at 4:00 in the morning. They don't want to hear that. So, I had to make adjustments for that. But where things really changed for me, Amanda, is about when my daughter was about 4 or 5 years old. No, actually, it was before that. Maybe when she was about 2, I realized that she wasn't speaking, like the regular, normal kids her age. So I ended up taking her to the doctor. And that's when I find out what they deemed she was developmentally delayed, or what they call autism now. So you talk about a totally set challenges dealing with a child with special needs, really turned things around for me and helped me to realize that it was no longer about me, being out of control and that type of stuff. I had to get my life in order so that my past financial mistakes or my past mistakes in general didn't affect my daughter's life, because I didn't know what her future held, right? I was just like, what is this developmentally delayed? What does that mean? Would she ever talk? Would she ever, get married? Would she, it's just those type things ran through my head. So yeah, it was very challenging to say the least once I got that, diagnosis about my daughter.
Yeah, and what I've noticed from like single parents is like you don't really have a choice, especially like it's not that you don't have a choice, you don't really have time to think about like, is the military the right path for me or should I become a civilian? Like, because everything falls on you and you're just trying to like get through each day. There's no like take a break and think. And so you're just like plowing forward. Because I was talking to Teresa, one of my guests, and she was a single parent. I was talking to her and she's like, I never even thought about getting out of the military because I had like no time to think about if there was another option.
Oh my goodness. You bring up a good point, Amanda, in that before all of this, when I went into the military, it was my intentions to do my 4 years, get my GI Bill and go. That was my intention. But life happened. And once I got that diagnosis about my daughter, even though I wanted to get out, I was too afraid. I couldn't afford it. I was thinking, okay, medical, I didn't want to lose my benefits, for my daughter, and that type of stuff. So yeah, it's just kind of like I sucked it up and was like, okay, well, I'm going to stay in, like the decision was made. There was no more, oh, should I, or that type of stuff. It was like the decision was made despite my fears, despite what I wanted to do. Yeah, I had to do what was in the best interest of my daughter. So you're exactly right.
Yeah, it changed everything about your path forward.
It did.
So you were able to get out and do your master's, and that was with ROTC. So were you on like scholarship with the ROTC program, or how did that all work?
Yeah, no, once again, I was prior enlisted, so I didn't get the scholarship things, but thankfully I had, back in the day, I had the Montgomery GI Bill, right? That came before the post 9/11. So I had my Montgomery GI Bill. And also, because of the work that I had did up to that point, making sure I was financially secure, because once I found out about my daughter, it changed everything for me, especially in regards to my finances, right? I made sure I had to focus and regain control of my finances. So that's where I really went down that path to learn everything I could about personal finances. But because I had my financial house in order, it allowed me to take advantage of these opportunities that I may not have done otherwise. Like I said, who would have left the military for a year? You're losing your paycheck, that type of stuff, where I wasn't worried about it because I didn't have any, other type debt. I had savings. I had, I was prepared. So that's how I was able to do that for a year.
Well, that's awesome that you were able to do that and that you got everything squared away to make that happen so that when that opportunity came, you could take advantage of it. So what was it like to make the shift from being enlisted to being an officer? I like how you called it going to the dark side.
Oh, man. The main reason, Amanda, that I made that shift is because I was like, okay, if I'm going to be in it, I'm going to make the most of it. Right. So, of course, initially my mind was looking at the money. I'm like, I'm going to make this money, that type of stuff. But the other thing that was important to me as to the reason why I wanted to make the shift, I felt at the time that becoming an officer, I could have a greater impact on those that were, that follow behind me and that type stuff. So, and it was true up to a sense, but in the beginning, it was challenging for me because I was not your average lieutenant. So I was like, I'm going to age myself. 32 at the time. Second lieutenant, had been in 12 years when I made that switch. So here I was starting over. And, going through what officer training, like basic training again with these little recruits telling me what to do and saying, oh, and they're Air Force. I'm like, what are you talking? You haven't even been in, type stuff. So it was very challenging for me to make that switch because, in an officer role, you're more about the leading, right? The delegating and stuff like that. And my enlisted role, I'm the one, I did the work, I'm down in the trenches. So it was hard for me to kind of separate myself and not be in the details, to be right there beside my troops. Like, no, let me do it. Because once I switched over, I was finance, but I was previously personnel. So I knew we worked hand in hand. So if something was wrong with my pay or whatever, I'm like, no, let me go in in the system. I know what to do it, or I'm going to go talk to such and such. They were like, will you sit down somewhere type stuff. So that was the most challenging part for me It's just making that switch because the enlisted force is much tighter, knit, family oriented versus the officer side. Plus, most officers are married with family. Here I am, once again, single. So I kind of didn't, I fit the mold, so to speak, as your normal officer. But like I said, I was just your average lieutenant. So I had to let my actions speak louder than my words. So they would look beyond my rank and not see that butter bar, so to speak. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like the senior NCOs help the lieutenants, and now you were almost senior NCO, and then you started all over again. So you had like the knowledge that no lieutenant like me had. You're like, I don't need you. I know how this works. But then you also, that would make it an interesting dynamic for 12 years. So what rank were you when you made the switch? What?
I was an E6. A tech sergeant, and then, like you said, went to a second lieutenant. And it's so funny. Yeah, I remember bumping heads with one of my chiefs, an E9, right? So, and she didn't know, so I had to tell her. I'm like, look, okay, I'm not your average lieutenant. You're not going to call me in your office. You come to my office type stuff. So it's those type of dynamics. They learned quickly that Ann was prior enlisted.
Yeah. And I think also being a little bit older than like second lieutenants are like usually right out of college, and we're either single with no kids or we're married and just newly married, and it's like a party life.
Yes. And yes, it was. Very true.
So where did September 11th happen, before or after you went on active duty?
It happened before. It was so fun. In 2001, yeah, I was still out. But I remember, of course, where I was because I was doing the training for ROTC and stuff. I was at Keesler at the time. And while I was out, I was doing like the VA work study program. And I worked in the MPF, the military personnel flight, doing like, what's it called? Like the survivor benefit office. So I was on my way actually to work when that happened. So
you were out, but you had that past experience, and so you kind of like have a different experience because you served before September 11th. You were out during September 11th, and then you went back to the Air Force. Was it a different type of Air Force than you had been in before, or?
I would say, besides the, wartime environment or the mindset that we were in after the fact was the main difference, besides, once again, being on the officer side, that was the main difference. But pretty much, things were pretty much, it was the same except for, the deployments, and the ops tempo was very fast, that type stuff. So definitely.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of people talk about how the ops tempo kind of went on full blast, and they haven't really slowed down since. It's like,
very true.
What base did you go to when you were a second lieutenant?
Oh, what was my first base? That's a good question if I can remember. Maxwell. Actually, it's called Gunner, but it's attached to Maxwell. So it was Maxwell or Gunner Air Station was my first duty station in Alabama, which I was happy because I'm originally from Georgia. So I was an hour and a half away from family in Columbus. So I loved it.
That's great. And then where did you go after that?
Where did I go after Maxwell? Girl, I'm trying to think. Maxwell. Then I went to South Carolina. Yes, South Carolina. Shaw Air Force Base.
And what was your experience like there? Was your career pretty much the same, or did you have like a deployment or any super hard aspects of your career?
Yeah, great point. Yeah, when I went to Shaw, once again at Maxwell, I was finance, like the budget side. And then when I went to Shaw, I was once again the budget side. Because when you're talking about finance, you have like meal pay side of the house, like stuff like that. And you have the budget where we pay the bills, or like we like to say. But so one of the things that I did when I was in South Carolina was I applied to become a special duty assignment and become an ROTC instructor. So I was happy about that, and I got chosen to go teach at the University of South Carolina, Det 775, go Gamecocks. That's where, once again, things turned around for me, because a lot of times, a lot of people say your career if you go to ROTC or you take a special duty assignment. To be completely honest with you, I hadn't deployed up to that point, right? And that was like 17 or 18 years in. So I went to ROTC to avoid getting deployed because once again, I'm still a single parent. I didn't want to get deployed. I didn't want to leave my daughter and stuff like that. So that's the main reason why I went to ROTC. Well, wouldn't you know, I get hit with a deployment while I'm at ROTC. So my first and only deployment was a year-long deployment to Iraq.
They found you.
They found me, girl.
Yeah. I think we should talk about ROTC and then we'll talk about your deployment because I don't feel like I've talked to anyone about ROTC from the cadre side of it. That's like leadership. So what was it like to be molding young college students into officers?
I mean, I loved it. I mean, it's so funny. I kind of missed it when I was talking about my enlisted side. But when I was enlisted, I was an instructor as well at the tech training school as Keesler for personnel. So that's really where I found my love for teaching is when I was enlisted teaching. So when I got selected for ROTC instructor, I mean, I just loved it. And like you said, just molding your future leaders. As you mentioned, young college kids, they're partying and doing all these things, but they're testing out to see if the Air Force is an option for them, and just being able to share my real life experiences with them, right? We taught history and that type of stuff, but nothing takes the place of, hey, here's what I did and here's what you need to do as a second lieutenant. Remain humble. Don't go in there wearing your rank. And I kept it real with them. And that's what I think that they loved about it because they knew, because I was enlisted before. So now they see me and they was like, wow, that type of stuff. So I absolutely love molding those young minds. And I still keep in contact with plenty of them today. Yeah, almost 9-10 years later. So it's awesome.
Yeah, the cadre that we had, I am connected on Facebook with a few of them, and what I remember, they're like, when you go on active duty, you better be humble. You're just a second lieutenant who doesn't know anything.
You don't know nothing.
That's funny. I'm starting to help mentor young women who are joining the military, all like enlisted officer, just any branch, just trying to give them advice. And it's been so rewarding. So I bet ROTC is just like so much fun.
It is. And like, a little bit about the cadre. Well, so I served as the recruiting officer, so getting people to join ROTC and also the OPSO, or the command, the person in charge of everything. So I wore both hats. So I loved it, man. I really did. I really did.
Yeah, I have such good memories from ROTC. It was so much fun. So they found you and you got tasked with a 365 to Iraq. And you already mentioned you're a single mom. So what did you do with your daughter? Yeah,
that's a great point. Yeah, they found me and not, they made up for lost times, right? Not a 6-month deployment. They tagged me with a year-long deployment. I was stressed out, but, once I changed my perspective of it and was like, I'm going to make the most of this. So once again, I was very fortunate. I was in South Carolina at the time. My mother lived in California. And by that time, my daughter was 16, 17 years old, still, autistic type stuff. So my mother, I didn't want to change my daughter's environment. I could have sent her to her father because we have great co-parenting relationship. He lived out of state, but I didn't want to change her routine so drastically. So I was fortunate enough that my mother, she moved from California to South Carolina and stayed in my apartment and helped, and took care of my daughter while I was gone for that year. So that really put me at ease, to be able to go over and do that deployment. Once I knew my daughter was taken care of. Once I knew my daughter was straight, nothing else really didn't matter. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I wanted to come back safely, but I knew I had to do what I had to do. I couldn't get out of it. So yeah, once my daughter was situated, I was good. So my mother helped me out for that year.
And when you were in Iraq, were you still doing like the budget side of things?
Yeah, actually, I was still budget, and, that was my first and only deployment. And once again, I can't complain about that either. It was a joint employment. So it was the first time that I was working with Army, Navy, Marines, yeah, it was just awesome. And that just seeing how other things work. But yeah, I was doing budget, and our call sign was, I just love it, right? Because everybody thinks if you're in the Air Force, you can fly planes or, this type stuff. And then when I say finance, we would say, you make the kill, we pay the bill. Right? So yeah, so I actually, like I said, I can't complain because we weren't, Air Force, once again, we weren't living in tents. We had our little mobile units that we were living in, and the bathroom was inside, so I didn't have to walk down and go to the bathroom. And it was at a time when Iraq was dying down and Afghanistan was picking up. So that was in 2009. So, once again, that kind of put me at ease, as well. But it was still some challenging times. But for the most part, I can't complain.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it depends on when and where you went, what the activity was like, because I went to Afghanistan in 2010, but it was more northern part, and so it was a lot safer than down south near Kandahar. And then my friend went 3 years later to Afghanistan, and they got rocketed all the time at Bagram, and I was like, we never got rocketed, and it's the same place but different time. It just all depends on where you are. And I mean, it's still dangerous, and you never know what's going to happen, but there's a level of security when you're not getting rocketed very often. And
yeah, I was not right in Baghdad, but it was maybe 30 minutes south of Baghdad, called Fob Phoenix or Union 3. The name changed so many times. But like you said, it wasn't an everyday occurrence, but it still happened. The bombing. And at one point we lived outside of the gates where we had to take a bus every morning to work. So that was, nerve wracking. I remember one time incoming, we had to get off the bus and get into these cement blocks, that type of stuff. So yeah, some things you never forget.
For sure. It's a life-changing experience no matter what.
Absolutely. It definitely is.
Yeah. So when you came home from your deployment, did you feel like it was a smooth transition back to normal life? Did your daughter adjust well to you being home just because she was able to keep her routine and not have to move?
Yeah. And that was the good thing. It was a good adjustment. It took a little bit for me and my mother, because she's used to being back in control of things. And here I come back home and have my little input. So pretty much it was a smooth adjustment. Once again, my sleep pattern has never been the same. Work-wise, it was pretty cool, but it was shortly thereafter that, I decided I was once again afforded the opportunity. Something came up where I could retire early to put my papers in, and that's exactly what I did. So I ended up retiring maybe a year after getting back.
And you served 21 years, right?
Yeah, 21 years total.
But when you make the switch from officer to enlisted, most often do you have to serve 10 years to get the retirement? Is that?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's normally what it is. But like I said, during that time, it was a drawdown time or whatever. And they came out with this program. I remember it vividly because up before that point, my commander at ROTC, he knew that I was waiting for something. I was like, man, if I get the opportunity, I'm out of here. I wasn't one of those ones that was afraid to get out or retire. I was ready to retire. So sure enough, they came out with this special program. They was doing a RIF, reduction in force, where they said if you had 8 years in, right, then as an officer versus those 10, then you can retire. I was on leave that day. I had took a day off or whatever have you. My boss called me on the phone. He knows not to call me when I'm on leave. But he called me. He was like, Ann, he said, I know not to call you. He said, but look at this email that I sent you. I said, okay. So he had sent me an email about the program with the 8 years retirement. I went in that same day off of leave and put in my paperwork. Okay. He was like, no, you couldn't wait. I said, no, because they was like, first come, first serve, you just don't know how many people they were going to allow through, that type stuff. So I went in that exact same day and put my paperwork in to apply for that program to retire early. And so that's why I was able to retire without the 10 years of service and only the 8 for being an officer.
Yeah, you were ready.
Girl, beyond ready. You stay ready.
So you were ready for the transition out of the military, but you had been in the military since you graduated high school, essentially. I mean, it was a few months after. But what was the transition like from being in the military to not being in the military and not going back because you did the college thing that one time?
I was ready, right? So I think, like I told you, when everything changed for me with my daughter, right? So it was at that moment that I started preparing for my transition. I knew that the military I wasn't going to stay in it forever. I knew I was going to do my 20 years and that type stuff, but I just started preparing then, whether it's my finances, whether it's my education, right? I made sure I had all my degrees. I knew that, the career fields that I worked in was transferable. I was personnel, I was finance, that type thing. So I just prepared all the way for what I wanted my retirement to look, my transition to look like. I knew that I didn't want to have to work. I only wanted to work because I wanted to and not because I had to. So I just prepared all the way up to that point. So when it was time for me to transition, I was ready. I didn't have any of the challenges that, you may hear about on the news, as far as employment and stuff like that. Because one, granted, yes, I had the retirement that I can, that I knew I had that guaranteed income. But because of the fact that all of my other finances was in order, I didn't have any debt, I didn't have a car payment, I knew I didn't have to work only because I wanted to. So I took a year off. I did absolutely nothing. I did what I wanted to do. I traveled. I slept in. Girl, I just did whatever I wanted to do and didn't care about it. I was just ready. I had prepared for it. So it wasn't my transition, what I consider a successful transition for me. And I know that's not the case for everyone, but I didn't experience a lot of the challenges that, you hear about with the unemployment or the identity piece, a little bit, but my identity was never so wrapped up in the military, right? Like some people can't see their lives outside of the military. I was like, I can take this uniform off tomorrow and be good, type stuff. So I was just ready, man. But it all started, like I said, years ago when I was maybe 4 years in, where I started planning for my transition, for my eventual retirement.
See, I think that's really good advice because I think that everyone should be planning for their transition from the day you join, like you said, because you don't know if it'll happen unexpectedly, if you get hurt or there's a rift, and then you're prepared for whatever comes. And then if you do make it to the 20 years and you can get the retirement, you're extra ready. Exactly. Yeah, because I say 2 years out, but 2 years out isn't enough time to get, especially if you haven't been taking care of your finances. And then if there's courses you need to take, you already were mentally prepared. And a lot of people are trying to deal with finding a job, getting their finances, and the emotional aspect. And you were already ready for it all.
I was already ready for it all, because like you said, the transition is inevitable. It's going to happen. Right? So like you said, whether it's planned or it can be unplanned, but it's going to happen. You can't stay in the military forever. So, you have to set yourself up for life outside of the military, whatever that is for you. Everybody's life, is going to look different. But I knew how I wanted my life to look, my daughter's life to look. Yeah, planning early, preparation early was key for me, or key to a successful transition, in my opinion, and based off of my research.
So you had your gap year, that's what I'll call it, your gap year, that you got to do whatever you want, travel, take breaks, do all that stuff. What did you do after that? And what are you doing the same thing now?
Yeah, once I guess kind of got bored, so to speak, with my year, I still had money on my GI Bill. So I decided to go back to school, because that was one of my goals when I was in. I was like, okay, in retirement, I want to be able to teach online. I wanted to work from home. I knew that whatever it wasn't going to be on somebody else's dime, going and clocking in. I just knew that wasn't going to work for me, because I did it for 21 years. I didn't want no one else telling me what to do. So I knew that whatever I chose to do, it has to be on my schedule, flexibility, that type stuff. So I decided to go back for my doctorate at the time, because I already had my master's. So yeah, that was my full-time job for 3.5 years, is working on my doctorate degree using my GI Bill. Did I work? Nope. I had my retirement check. I was able to live, once again, because I had my finances in order based off of my retirement check. And no, I wasn't a colonel when I retired. So for people thinking, oh, you retired as a colonel, you can do that. No, I retired as a captain in 2003. Yeah, that's what I lived off of. And in addition to my VA disability, I'll add that in as well. So, but because once again, I had my finances in order, finance wasn't an issue for me, and I always wanted that to be the case. So I went back and got my doctorate of education and organizational leadership.
And then after that, what are you doing now?
What I am doing now is so funny. Like I went to school to become a teacher and I did that. But, I also always wanted to have my own business, right? So it takes somebody else speaking into your life to kind of give you a kick in the butt. So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine one time and I had given her a book about finances. She was like, what about this finance thing that you're always going to talk about? What are you going to do with it? And I was like, I don't know. What am I going to do with it? So, after that conversation, that's when I decided to actually step out and start doing financial coaching, financial consulting, opening up my own business, Financial Freedom Battle Buddies. And that's where I help my fellow, similar to you, Amanda, is my fellow military service women or those that have transitioned, help them to regain control of their finances so they can conquer the battle and live life freely. So that's what I've been doing, and I love it. That's that next chapter.
That's awesome. And we'll put links in the show notes so that people can connect with you on LinkedIn and get to your website so they can learn more, because finances is a really important topic and a lot of people don't know. I think you just don't know what you don't know about finances. And then once you learn it, it's easier to manage.
Yes, exactly. You don't know what you don't know because a lot of times it's not taught in school anymore. And if you're like me, it wasn't spoken about in my household, right? So a lot of my education came from, self-educating myself, webinars and reading books, and learn by doing my own personal experiences with debt, paying off debt and stuff like that. So it's based off of personal experiences and also now the education, because I am an accredited financial counselor as well. So you hit it on the head. You don't know what you don't know, but once you know, hopefully you'll start to do better, right? So that's what I hope to help my clients do. It doesn't matter where you're at or where you came from, that they too can live life financially free.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more of like how you spend your money and not how much money you make. Like you said, you retired as a captain, not an 06, and you can make your money go a lot farther when you know where it's going.
Exactly. That's girl. I would say that all the time too. I'm like, it's not about the money that you make, how much, it's how much you keep and what you do with it. So the less places that you have to have it going out there floating around paying other people, and you can pay yourself, be your own bank, so to speak. And I'm not just talking about pay yourself first. I'm talking about keeping all of your money so that you can do whatever you want with it, and that's my definition of financial freedom, doing what I want when I want without ever worrying about money. So that's what I hope to help individuals do as well.
If you're looking for help, make sure you go check out the show notes. And then my last question is, what advice would you give to young women who are considering joining the military?
Ooh, what advice would I give to young women that's considering joining the military? The same advice that I gave as a recruiter when I worked at ROTC is know the good and the bad. Do your research before you make a decision. Don't just look at, oh, it's a steady paycheck and I get to travel and the benefits. Yes, that's all part of it. But are you okay with going to war? Are you okay with being separated from your family? Are you okay, getting called at 4:00 in the morning and you have to be where they say you're going to be? You don't have an input on it. So know the good and the bad before you make a decision. Do your research. Talk to people that have been where you are. Don't just listen to a recruiter and call it a day, right? So talk to other individuals that have been where you want to be, but make an informed decision and just know you can do anything for 4 years, right? You don't have to think, oh, I got to go in and stay 20 years. No, you can do 2 years, whatever the enlistments are now, you can do 4 years and you're that much ahead of that person that don't have military experience, as well. But I would say do your research before you make that decision because it's life-changing. It's a life-changing decision. So that's what I would say.
That's great advice. And if you're looking for more information about joining the military, I have a Girl's Guide to the Military. And when this goes live, I'll have a Girl's Guide to the Military YouTube channel so you can get all your questions answered. And if you have another question that I haven't covered, just email me and that'll make a great video. So that would be awesome. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to you and hear about your experience in the military.
Thank you, Amanda. I don't know if you remember this, but when we met at MCMAN and I found out what you were doing, I was like, with your podcast, I was like, I want to do that too. I mean, you inspired me to, because I had never met someone that, was doing a podcast specifically focusing on women veterans. And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I want to do. So my podcast is in the work and will be released, if not by the end of the year, by the beginning of the year. But it all started when I met you at MIC. It's coming, girl, but it started with you. So thank you it came full circle. That's, to be on your show. And then from when I first met you, that's where it first started for me. The idea of a podcast is by meeting you. So thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope that it encouraged and inspired you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Women of the Military on YouTube. And come back next week for another story of a woman veteran sharing her experience in the military.